Single moms like you disgust me, he sneered as he stormed out of the diner, never realizing his own boss was watching everything. And what happened next would flip their lives upside down forever. But when kindness collides with betrayal, will love and faith be strong enough to survive? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Grace Miller smoothed her worn floral dress for the 10th time, her fingers tracing the carefully mended seam at the hip. The small tear had been Noah's doing, an enthusiastic hug that caught her off guard last week. She'd stayed up late fixing it, determined to look perfect for tonight. The diner's warm lighting cast a gentle glow across the red vinyl booth, where Saturday Christmas lights twinkled year-round in the windows, giving the place a perpetual feeling of possibility. The familiar scent of coffee and fresh-baked pie usually brought her comfort, but tonight her stomach was tied in knots. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, adjusting the small silver pendant, her mother's, that hung at her throat. After 5 years of focusing solely on Noah and work, she was finally trying to date again. Her friend Sarah from church had insisted Eric Wallace, was different, successful, well-mannered, looking for something serious. The bell above the door chimed. Grace's heart skipped as a tall man in an expensive charcoal suit entered, his leather shoes gleaming under the diner's lights. He glanced around, his sharp features settling into a frown as he spotted her. "Grace Miller?" His voice was clipped, professional. She stood quickly, nearly knocking over her water glass. "Yes, hi, Eric? It's nice to meet you." Her smile felt wobbly, but she held out her hand. He shook it briefly, as if touching something slightly distasteful, before sliding into the opposite bench. "Sarah mentioned you work at the grocery store?" Heat crept up Grace's neck. "Yes, I'm a cashier at Morton's. I also do some bookkeeping for—" He cut her off, studying the menu with more attention than a list of burgers and milkshakes deserved. "I suppose everyone has to start somewhere." Grace's fingers twisted in her lap. The conversation lurched forward like a car with a bad transmission. Stop and start, grinding gears. Eric spoke at length about his position at Andrews Financial, his golf handicap, his recent vacation to Aspen. Grace nodded and smiled, trying to find common ground. When the waitress came to take their order, Eric's entire demeanor changed. He became charm, personified, all gleaming teeth and smooth compliments. The moment she walked away, his face settled back into its mask of barely concealed disdain. "So," he said, adjusting his gold cufflinks, "tell me about yourself." Sarah mentioned something about a child. For the first time that evening, Grace's smile became genuine. "Yes, my son Noah. He's 7, absolutely brilliant at science. Just last week at school. A child." Eric's voice cut through her words like a blade. "And the father?" "He's not in the picture," Grace said quietly, her joy deflating. "It's just Noah and me." The change in Eric's expression was immediate and terrible. His features twisted as if he'd bitten into something rotten. He pushed back from the table, chair legs scraping against linoleum. "Single moms like you disgust me," he spat, standing. Did Sarah really think I'd be interested in someone else's leftover life? Someone who clearly made such poor choices? The diner fell silent. Grace could feel every eye on her, could hear the whispers starting like a summer breeze through dry leaves. Her chest tightened until she could barely breathe. I don't understand," she managed, her voice small. "Let me be clear then," Eric sneered. "I'm looking for a partner, not a charity case. Someone who can enhance my position at the firm, not drag me down with grocery store wages and someone else's kid." He grabbed his coat. "Don't contact me again." He stormed toward the door, each footstep echoing in the horrible silence. The bell chimed again, cheerful, mocking, as he disappeared into the night. Grace sat frozen, her half-empty water glass blurring through tears she refused to let fall. The whispers grew louder. Someone laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that seemed to crack something inside her chest. She'd spent so long building walls around her heart, focusing on giving Noah the best life possible. One moment of hope, of thinking maybe she deserved something for herself, and this was her reward. Public humiliation, confirmation of every doubt that kept her awake at night. Slowly, carefully, she reached for her worn purse, fumbling for money to pay for the untouched coffee. Her hand shook as she pulled out a $5 bill. part of her carefully budgeted treat-yourself fund that had seemed so promising this morning. The whispers continued. Grace could imagine what they were saying. Poor thing. What did she expect? Probably deserved it. She kept her head down, letting her graying hair fall forward to hide her face. The shame burned in her chest, bitter as acid, as she tried to make herself as small as possible in the suddenly too bright diner. A tear escaped despite her best efforts, sliding down her cheek to land on the gleaming tabletop. She watched it spread, a tiny universe of hurt, unaware that behind the counter, someone had witnessed everything, someone whose quiet observation would soon change the course of her life. Grace's tears fell silently onto the worn tablecloth, each drop a reminder of her humiliation. The whispers from nearby tables felt like tiny needles against her skin. She fumbled in her purse for a tissue, her hands trembling. "Excuse me." A gentle voice broke through her fog of shame. Grace looked up to find a distinguished older gentleman standing beside her table. His silver hair caught the warm light of the diner, and kind wrinkles framed his eyes. He wore a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and a name tag that read, Thomas Andrews, owner. "I couldn't help but notice what happened," he said, his voice low and caring. "May I?" He gestured to the empty seat across from her. Grace nodded weakly, dabbing at her eyes with a crumpled napkin. "I'm so sorry for causing a scene," she whispered. "You didn't cause anything," Mr. Andrews said firmly. He settled into the booth, his presence somehow both authoritative and gentle. That man's behavior was inexcusable. A waitress approached with fresh coffee, and Mr. Andrews nodded for her to fill both cups. The rich aroma wafted between them, offering a small comfort in the midst of Grace's embarrassment. "Don't let fools decide your worth," he said, pushing the sugar bowl toward her. "Being a single mother isn't a shame. It's a badge of courage." Grace's hands wrapped around the warm mug, seeking its steadiness. "Thank you, but you don't have to be kind to me. I shouldn't have come here thinking." Her voice trailed off. "Thinking what? That you deserve companionship? Respect?" Mr. Andrews's voice carried a note of fatherly protection. "Everyone deserves that. It's just..." Grace struggled to find the words. "Sometimes it feels like the whole world judges us. Single moms, I mean. Like we're somehow less worthy." Mr. Andrews leaned forward slightly, his blue eyes serious. "My own mother raised 3 children alone after my father passed. She was the strongest person I've ever known." A fresh wave of tears threatened, but these felt different, less bitter, more healing. Grace took a sip of coffee to steady herself. "Your meal tonight is on the house, Mr. Andrews said, holding up a hand when Grace began to protest. "And not out of pity. Consider it my way of apologizing for that man's behavior in my establishment. That's very kind. But really, I can't accept..." "You can, and you will," he said with gentle firmness. "Besides, you'll need to save that money for something more important." His eyes crinkled with understanding. "Perhaps ice cream for a certain young man?" The mention of Noah brought a small smile to Grace's lips. "He's probably wondering where I am. My neighbor's watching him, but he always waits up for me. Sounds like a wonderful boy." "He is," Grace said, and for the first time since the disaster of her date, her voice carried real warmth. "He's everything to me." Mr. Andrews nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Then he's a lucky young man to have such a devoted mother." He stood, straightening his vest. "Take your time, finishing your coffee." "And Grace?" He paused, making sure she met his gaze. "You have nothing to be ashamed of. Nothing at all." Grace watched as he moved away, stopping to chat with other customers, his presence bringing the same quiet dignity to each table he visited. Slowly, she felt her breathing return to normal, her shoulders relaxing from their tight hunch of humiliation. 20 minutes later, Grace stepped out into the cool evening air, her son's small hand warm in hers. Noah skipped beside her, chattering about his evening with Mrs. Peterson next door. "And then her cat did a flip, Mommy. Well, maybe not a real flip, but he jumped really high." "That's wonderful, sweetie," Grace said, squeezing his hand. The street lights cast long shadows on the sidewalk, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of approaching autumn. Noah's presence was like a balm to her wounded spirit. His innocent joy, his complete trust in her, it washed away the sting of earlier rejection. With each step toward home, she felt her dignity returning, not because of any man's approval, but because of the love walking beside her. "We'll be okay," she whispered more to herself than to Noah. Her son continued his animated story about Mrs. Peterson's acrobatic cat, unaware of the evening's earlier drama, unaware of the silver-haired man watching them through the diner's window. Through the gently falling darkness, Grace and Noah made their way home, their shadows merging with the gathering night. The click of their footsteps faded into the quiet street, leaving behind the warmth of the diner and the unexpected kindness of a stranger who had helped restore her faith in human decency. Grace pulled into the school drop-off lane, her old sedan making that familiar rattling sound that always made Noah giggle. The morning sun caught in her rearview mirror as she watched her son gather his backpack and lunchbox. "Have a wonderful day, sweetheart," she said, reaching back to squeeze his hand. "Remember, Mrs. Peterson is picking you up after school today while I work my second shift." "Okay, Mommy." Noah's gap-toothed smile brightened her world. He gave her a quick kiss on the cheek before hopping out of the car. Grace waited until he disappeared through the heavy school doors before pulling away. Her stomach growled, reminding her she hadn't eaten since yesterday's lunch. The diner was only a few blocks away, and their breakfast special was cheap enough to fit her tight budget. The bell above the door chimed as she entered. The familiar smell of coffee and pancakes wrapped around her like a warm blanket. A few early morning regulars dotted the counter, hunched over steaming mugs and newspapers. "Good morning, Grace." Mr. Andrews' voice carried from behind the counter. His silver hair caught the morning light streaming through the windows, and his kind eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Good morning," she replied softly, sliding onto a worn vinyl stool. She still felt embarrassed about yesterday, but something about his presence put her at ease. "Coffee?" he asked, already reaching for a clean mug. "Please." She managed a small smile. "And maybe the breakfast special?" Mr. Andrews nodded, jotting down her order. "Coming right up, on the house." "Oh, no, I couldn't." "I insist," he said firmly but kindly. "Everyone deserves a good breakfast." Grace wrapped her hands around the warm mug he placed before her, breathing in the rich aroma. "Mr. Andrews leaned against the counter, and they fell into easy conversation about the weather, the morning rush, and the new flower shop opening down the street. The door's bell chimed again, but Grace didn't look up until she heard a familiar voice that made her heart skip. "Mommy!" Noah came bounding across the diner, his backpack bouncing with each step. Grace's eyes widened in surprise. "Noah? What are you doing here? You're supposed to be in school. Our field trip got canceled," he explained breathlessly, climbing onto the stool next to her. "Mrs. Thompson brought us here instead." He pointed to where his teacher stood by the door with the rest of his class. That's when Noah noticed Mr. Andrews. His eyes grew round, and before Grace could stop him, he blurted out, "Are you the man Mommy says is my daddy?" The diner went silent. Grace felt her face burn red hot as several customers tried to stifle their laughter. She wanted to disappear into the floor. "Noah, I never." But Mr. Andrews was already moving around the counter. He knelt down beside Noah's stool, meeting the boy's eyes with gentle sincerity. The whole diner seemed to hold its breath. "Well," Mr. Andrews said softly, "maybe one day, if I'm very lucky, I could earn that honor." Grace's heart stumbled in her chest. The tenderness in his voice, the way he looked at Noah with such warmth, it made her throat tight with emotion. Noah beamed. "Really? Because Tommy has 2 daddies now, and he says it's the best thing ever." More chuckles rippled through the diner, but this time they were warm, touched by the innocence of the moment. Mr. Andrews smiled and ruffled Noah's hair. "How about we start with chocolate chip pancakes?" he suggested. "Would you like that?" "Yes, please." Noah bounced excitedly on his stool. Grace watched as Mr. Andrews headed to the kitchen, her emotions swirling like cream in coffee. The way he'd handled Noah's outburst with such grace and kindness left her speechless. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Noah's class enjoyed their impromptu breakfast field trip, with Mr. Andrews making sure every child had plenty to eat. He kept stealing glances at Grace, his eyes twinkling whenever their gazes met. That evening, Grace tucked Noah into bed, smoothing his dinosaur-printed sheets around him. The memory of the morning's events played over and over in her mind. "Mommy?" Noah's sleepy voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Yes, sweetheart? I like Mr. Andrews. He makes the best pancakes." Grace smiled, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "He does, doesn't he? And he's nice," Noah continued, yawning. "Not like that mean man from yesterday." Grace's heart squeezed. She hadn't known Noah had seen that. "You're right, honey. He is very nice." Noah's eyes drifted closed, his breathing evening out as sleep claimed him. Grace sat on the edge of his bed a moment longer. Mr. Andrews's words echoing in her mind. Maybe one day, if I'm very lucky. For the first time in years, a tiny spark of hope flickered in her chest. She tried to push it away, to remind herself of all the disappointments and heartaches she'd endured. But the warmth of that hope persisted, as gentle and steady as Mr. Andrews's kind smile. She leaned down and kissed Noah's forehead, then quietly left his room. The apartment was silent, except for the distant hum of traffic and the soft ticking of the kitchen clock. Grace wrapped her arms around herself, still feeling the lingering warmth of that morning's unexpected moment. Grace's knees ached as she scrubbed the bathroom floor of Mrs. Henderson's sprawling Victorian home. Sweat trickled down her temple, and her rubber gloves squeaked against the tiles. The sharp smell of cleaning products filled her nose, but she was used to it after years of housekeeping work. The quiet of the empty house was broken by her phone's sudden buzz. Grace sat back on her heels, peeled off a glove, and fished the phone from her pocket. Her heart skipped when she saw the diner's number on the screen. "Hello?" she answered, trying to keep her voice steady. "Grace? This is Thomas Andrews." His warm voice carried through the line, making her sink down to sit on the edge of the bathtub. "Mr. Andrews, is everything all right?" She couldn't help but worry. No one usually called during her work hours except Noah's school. He chuckled softly. "Everything's fine. I was wondering, well, our church is having its annual summer picnic this Saturday at Wilson Park. Would you and Noah like to join me?" Grace's throat tightened. She glanced at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, no makeup, wearing her old cleaning clothes. The contrast between her world and his suddenly felt vast. That's very kind of you," she stammered. "But I wouldn't want to impose. And I'm sure there are others you'd rather—" "Grace," he interrupted gently. "I'm asking because I want you both there. No imposing about it." She twisted the cleaning cloth in her free hand. "It's just, I know how people can be. The whispers, the looks." Being a single mother at church events isn't always. Her voice trailed off. "Mom!" Noah's voice suddenly echoed through the house. She hadn't heard Mrs. Peterson drop him off after his field trip was canceled. His footsteps thundered up the stairs. "Is that Noah?" Mr. Andrews asked. "Put him on for a moment?" Before Grace could respond, Noah burst into the bathroom, his backpack still on. "Mom, guess what? We saw real firefighters today, and—" He stopped when he saw the phone. "Who's that?" "It's Mr. Andrews from the diner," Grace said, holding out the phone. "He wants to talk to you." Noah's face lit up like Christmas morning. He grabbed the phone with both hands. "Hi, Mr. Andrews." A pause. "A picnic? With real hamburgers and everything?" Another pause, his eyes growing wider. "Can we go, Mom? Please, please, please." Grace watched her son's excitement bubble over, his whole body practically vibrating with hope. How long had it been since they'd done something social, something normal families did? "There'll be other kids his age," Mr. Andrews said when Noah handed the phone back. "The church youth group runs games and activities. And Grace," his voice softened, "is just neighbors breaking bread together. Nothing fancy, nothing formal. Just good people sharing a meal under the trees." She looked at Noah's pleading face, then back at her reflection. The woman in the mirror looked tired, worried. But something else was there too, a spark of possibility in her eyes that she hadn't seen in years. "What time should we be there?" she found herself asking. Noah whooped and threw his arms around her neck, nearly knocking her off the bathtub's edge. Mr. Andrews's warm laugh mingled with her son's joy. "I'll pick you both up at 11, he said. "And Grace? Thank you for saying yes." After they hung up, Grace sat there for a long moment, still holding her son. The bathroom cleaning supplies lay forgotten around them, but she couldn't bring herself to care. Noah chatted excitedly about what games he might play and whether there'd be ice cream. Grace turned back to the mirror, studying her reflection more carefully this time. The same faded t-shirt, the same worn face, but something had changed. A tiny smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Maybe," she whispered so quietly that even Noah didn't hear. "God's opening a door." The Sunday afternoon sun bathed the church grounds in golden light as Grace stood at the edge of the picnic, clutching a store-bought potato salad she'd scraped money together to buy. Checkered blankets dotted the grass like a patchwork quilt, laden with steaming dishes and laughing families. The smell of fried chicken and fresh-baked rolls drifted through the warm air. Noah tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, can I go play? Please?" His eyes were fixed on a group of children tossing a red ball near the old oak tree. Grace smoothed his cowlick with trembling fingers. "Of course, sweetie. Just stay where I can see you." He darted off, and she watched as the other children immediately welcomed him into their game. If only it were that simple for adults, she thought. She felt the weight of curious glances from the church members, some kind, others questioning. Her second-hand dress suddenly felt like a spotlight. "Grace!" Mr. Andrews's warm voice cut through her anxiety. He approached with a gentle smile, wearing casual khakis and a light blue button-down shirt that somehow made him look both distinguished and approachable. "I'm so glad you came. Thank you for inviting us," she said softly, holding up her dish. "I brought potato salad. Perfect timing. Let's find a spot to set up." He gestured to a quiet corner of the lawn, partially shaded by a maple tree. As they walked, he carried himself with an easy confidence that seemed to deflect the stares of others. They spread out a blanket, and Mr. Andrews insisted on filling a plate for her before getting his own. "Try Mrs. Johnson's fried chicken," he said. "It's legendary around here." Grace took a small bite and couldn't help but close her eyes. "Oh my goodness," she murmured. "That is amazing. Sarah, my late wife, used to try to recreate it," Mr. Andrews said, his eyes growing distant. "She never quite got it right, but she'd laugh about it every time." He paused, running his finger along the edge of his plate. "She would have liked you, Grace." The simple statement hung in the air between them. Grace's throat tightened. "How long has she been gone?" 8 years, this October. He looked out across the lawn, watching Noah chase the ball with the other children. The house gets quiet. The diner helps. All those people, all those stories. But sometimes, the silence is loudest at night. Grace finished softly. "Exactly." He turned to her, his eyes gentle. "How do you do it? Raise Noah on your own?" Grace watched her son, his cheeks flushed with joy as he played. "One day at a time. Some days, it's counting pennies for milk. Other days, it's holding him while he cries because the other kids have dads at their baseball games." She twisted her napkin in her lap. "But then he'll look at me with those big eyes and say something so sweet it makes everything worth it." Mr. Andrews nodded, understanding in his expression. "He's a remarkable boy. You've done an incredible job with him." A plump woman with silver hair approached their blanket, carrying a plate of brownies. "Thomas Andrews, are you hoarding all the good conversation over here?" She smiled warmly at Grace. "I'm Martha, the choir director. We've missed having young families join us. Please, have a brownie." Soon, others drifted over. A young couple with twins sat nearby, asking Grace about Noah's age and interests. An elderly man named Frank shared stories about when the church was first built. Gradually, Grace felt her shoulders relax as the afternoon wore on. She noticed Mr. Andrews watching her with quiet satisfaction as she chatted with Martha about possibly joining the Christmas choir. His presence felt like an anchor, steady and reassuring. As the sun began to set, parents started packing up coolers and gathering sleepy children. Noah had played himself to exhaustion and wandered back to their blanket, his eyes heavy. Without hesitation, he climbed into Mr. Andrews's lap and leaned back against his chest. "Is this okay?" Grace asked quickly, starting to reach for Noah. "More than okay," Mr. Andrews said softly, arranging Noah more comfortably in his arms. The boy's breathing had already evened out into sleep. Grace sat back, taking in the scene before her. The last rays of sunlight painted the sky in pink and orange, casting a gentle glow over the churchyard. Noah's face was peaceful, one hand clutching Mr. Andrews's shirt. The older man hummed quietly, some old hymn that seemed to blend with the evening crickets. For the first time in years, Grace felt the hard knot of tension in her chest begin to unwind. Here, in this moment, she felt safe, protected, as if the walls she'd built to guard her heart weren't quite so necessary anymore. Martha passed by with her empty casserole dish, pausing to squeeze Grace's shoulder. "Same time next week?" she asked with a knowing smile. Grace looked at Mr. Andrews, who nodded encouragingly. "We'll be here," she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. The evening air grew cooler, and Noah snuggled deeper into Mr. Andrews's embrace, making small snuffling sounds in his sleep. Grace wrapped her arms around her knees, content to sit in the growing darkness and listen to the distant sound of car doors closing, of goodbye calls, and children's sleepy protests. She felt, for the first time since she could remember, that she belonged somewhere, that maybe, just maybe, she and Noah had found their place in the world. The morning sunlight streamed through Grace's worn curtains, painting her small bedroom in shades of honey. She lay in bed a moment longer, savoring the warmth of yesterday's memories. Mr. Andrews's gentle laugh, the way Noah had curled trustingly in his lap, the acceptance she'd felt among the church families. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Linda's name flashed on the screen. "You won't believe what's happening at Andrews Corp." Linda's voice crackled through the speaker, tight with anger. "They're laying off people left and right." Grace sat up, her peaceful mood evaporating. "What do you mean?" "Susan from accounting, you know, the one with 3 kids, gone. Maria from HR, fired yesterday. And get this, they're all single moms." Linda's words tumbled out in a rush. "They're calling it budget cuts, but everyone knows what's really going on." Grace's stomach churned. "That can't be right. Mr. Andrews wouldn't." "Oh, honey." Linda's voice softened with sympathy. "I know you've been spending time with him, but business is business. These corporate types, they show one face to the world and another in the boardroom." Grace pressed her fingers to her temples, trying to make sense of it all. The man who'd knelt to comfort her son, who'd defended her dignity in the diner. How could he be the same person behind these heartless decisions? "There's more," Linda continued. "I overheard the managers talking. They're targeting high-risk employees. That's code for single parents. Apparently, we take too many sick days when our kids need us." A knock at her bedroom door interrupted them. Noah poked his head in, already dressed in his favorite dinosaur pajamas. "Mom, can I have pancakes?" "Just a minute, sweetie," Grace managed, forcing a smile. To Linda, she whispered, "I have to go. Keep me posted?" After hanging up, Grace went through the motions of making breakfast. Her hands shook as she mixed the batter, spilling flour on the counter. Noah chatted happily about yesterday's picnic, oblivious to her distress. "Mr. Andrews said he'd teach me to fish someday," Noah announced, drowning his pancakes in syrup. "Can we go fishing with him, Mom? Please?" Grace's throat tightened. "We'll see, honey." The morning dragged on, each minute heavy with doubt. Grace cleaned houses on autopilot, her mind replaying every interaction with Mr. Andrews. Had she been naive, desperate to believe in kindness where there was none? By afternoon, she'd received 3 more texts from Linda, each worse than the last. More names added to the layoff list, all women, all single mothers. When she picked Noah up from school, he was clutching a drawing he'd made, 3 stick figures holding hands. "Look, Mom, it's you and me and Mr. Andrews." Grace's heart cracked. She tucked the drawing into her purse with trembling fingers, unable to look at it. At home, she watched Noah playing on the living room floor, his toy cars creating an elaborate highway across the carpet. He was making engine noises, lost in his innocent world of imagination. The same imagination that had let him see Mr. Andrews as a potential father figure. The thought made her chest ache. How many other children would be affected by these layoffs? How many mothers would struggle to keep food on the table, to maintain stability for their little ones? She thought of the church picnic, of Mr. Andrews sitting among his congregation, breaking bread and sharing stories. He'd spoken of integrity, of his late wife's compassion for others. Was it all just pretty words? Noah crashed 2 cars together with a dramatic boom! The sound made Grace jump. "Mom, are you okay?" Noah asked, looking up with concerned eyes so much older than his 7 years. She forced another smile. "Just thinking, sweetheart." But the thoughts wouldn't stop coming. The diner incident replayed in her mind. Mr. Andrews defending her against that cruel date's words. "Don't let fools decide your worth," he'd said. Yet here he was, letting his company decide the worth of women just like her. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Linda. "Just heard Jennifer from marketing got her notice. Her daughter's going through chemo. What kind of monster does this?" Grace's hands clenched into fists. She thought of Jennifer, who'd once shared her coffee during a particularly rough morning, who'd shown Grace pictures of her brave little girl, bald but smiling through treatments. Noah abandoned his cars and climbed onto the couch beside her, sensing her distress. He curled against her side, small and warm and trusting. She wrapped her arm around him, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo. "Tell me a story, Mom," he requested, something he always did when he sensed she was sad. But Grace couldn't find any stories right now. All she could think of was how easily Mr. Andrews had won their trust, how completely she'd let herself believe in his kindness, the way he'd knelt to Noah's level in the diner, speaking of earning the right to be called Daddy. Had it all been an act? A performance for his Sunday crowd, while Monday through Friday he signed papers that destroyed families? She looked down at Noah, still waiting for his story. His toy cars lay scattered across the floor, their bright colors a stark contrast to the growing darkness in her heart. The setting sun cast long shadows through their small living room, and Grace felt the weight of her own shadow of doubt stretching before her. "Maybe kindness is just another mask," she whispered, more to herself than to Noah, who had dozed off against her side. The words hung in the air, heavy with disappointment, and the bitter taste of lessons learned too late. Outside, a car door slammed, and Grace flinched, wondering how many more doors would close on single mothers tomorrow, next week, next month, all under Mr. Andrews' authority. Grace stood at the foot of Mr. Andrews' driveway, her hand clutching Noah's smaller one. The two-story colonial house before them wasn't a mansion, but it carried an air of dignified comfort with its well-tended garden and warm porch lights. Noah bounced excitedly beside her, the apple pie they'd brought wobbling precariously in his free hand. "Easy there, sweetheart." Grace steadied the pie dish. "We wanted to make it to the table in one piece." The front door opened, spilling golden light onto the porch steps. Mr. Andrews appeared, wearing a casual sweater that made him look softer than his usual business attire. "Welcome, welcome," he called out, his silver hair catching the evening light. "I'm so glad you both could make it." Noah broke free from Grace's grip and bounded up the steps. "Mr. Andrews, look what we made." "Is that pie I smell?" Mr. Andrews' eyes crinkled as he accepted the dish. "And please, call me Thomas when we're not at the diner." Grace followed more slowly, taking in the beautiful entry hall with its polished hardwood floors and family photos lining the walls. The house smelled of roasting chicken and herbs, making her mouth water. "I hope you like comfort food," Mr. Andrews said, leading them toward the kitchen. "My mother's recipe for herb-roasted chicken was always a family favorite." The kitchen was spacious and lived in, with copper pots hanging from a rack and children's artwork magnetized to the refrigerator. Grace noticed they were yellowed with age. A woman's touch was evident in the thoughtful details: hand-embroidered dish towels, carefully labeled spice jars, and a collection of well-worn cookbooks. "Can I show Noah the backyard before dinner?" Mr. Andrews asked Grace. "I've got a tire swing that hasn't seen nearly enough use lately." Grace nodded, watching as her son practically dragged Mr. Andrews through the French doors. Their laughter drifted back inside, making her heart twist with conflicting emotions. Linda's words from that morning echoed in her head. They're laying off single mothers left and right. She wandered into the living room, drawn to the photos on the mantel. A beautiful woman with laugh lines around her eyes smiled back at her from several frames. In one, she was surrounded by teenagers, all wearing graduation caps. In another, she and Mr. Andrews were dancing at what looked like a wedding, both radiating joy. "That's Margaret." Mr. Andrews' voice came softly from behind her. "My wife of 35 years. Grace turned, startled. She was beautiful, inside and out, he agreed, his eyes distant with memory. "Cancer took her 3 years ago. The house has been too quiet ever since the kids moved out, and then—" He trailed off, clearing his throat. "But tonight it feels alive again." Noah's already discovered the cookie jar, by the way. Right on cue, Noah appeared with chocolate smeared on his chin. "Mom, Mr. Andrews has the best cookies ever!" Dinner was served at a heavy oak table that could seat 12. Grace noticed the way Mr. Andrews automatically glanced at the empty chair to his right. Margaret's place, she guessed. But his smile was genuine as he passed the potatoes and asked Noah about school. The food was delicious, and Grace found herself relaxing despite her inner turmoil. Noah chatted animatedly about his science project, while Mr. Andrews listened with genuine interest, offering suggestions and encouragement. "You know, Mr. Andrews said. "I have some old science encyclopedias in the study that might help. They were my children's favorites." Noah's eyes lit up. "Can we look at them now?" "After dessert," Grace reminded him, rising to help clear the plates. Over apple pie and ice cream, Mr. Andrews shared stories about his own children growing up. 3 teenagers at once. "Margaret and I barely survived those years." He chuckled. "But now, they're scattered across the country. Emily's a doctor in Seattle. James teaches in Boston. And Sarah's doing environmental work in Alaska. Don't they visit?" Noah asked with a child's directness. A shadow crossed Mr. Andrews' face. "Not as often as I'd like. They're building their own lives now." Grace recognized the loneliness in his voice. She'd heard it in her own often enough. Yet as she watched him interact with Noah, showing him those promised encyclopedias and patiently explaining complex concepts in simple terms, she couldn't reconcile this gentle man with someone who would callously fire struggling mothers. Later, as Noah dozed on the living room couch, Grace insisted on helping with the dishes. The kitchen was quiet except for the soft clink of plates and the running water. Mr. Andrews dried while she washed, their movements falling into an easy rhythm. She studied his profile in the dim light over the sink. His face was kind, his hands careful with Margaret's old china. Everything about him spoke of decency and warmth. Yet Linda's words kept repeating in her mind, along with the faces of all the single mothers she knew at his company. Women just like her, trying to make ends meet, living paycheck to paycheck. The dishwater grew cold as Grace struggled with the contradiction. How could someone show such tenderness to her and Noah while possibly destroying other families' livelihoods? Could a man's personal kindness coexist with corporate cruelty? A simple butter knife slipped from her soapy fingers, clattering against the sink. Mr. Andrews glanced over, concerned. "Everything all right?" Grace forced a smile, but the question echoed in her heart. Could a man be both kind to me and cruel to women like me? The fluorescent lights of Parker's grocery store buzzed overhead as Grace pushed her cart down the cereal aisle, carefully comparing prices. Every penny counted these days. She'd learned to stretch her budget by buying generic brands and watching for sales. But feeding a growing boy wasn't getting any cheaper. She reached for the store-brand cornflakes, Noah's favorite, when voices from the next aisle caught her attention. "Can you believe what Andrews Corp is doing?" A woman's voice carried over the shelves.
"Sarah Mitchell got fired yesterday. No warning, nothing."
Grace's hand froze mid-reach. "A single mother with 3 kids," another woman replied, her voice thick with disgust. "And she's not the only one. Jenny from accounting, the one whose husband died last year, gone too." "They're targeting single moms," the first woman said, "calling it restructuring. But we all know what it really island cheaper to hire young singles with no family obligations." Grace's throat tightened. She gripped the shopping cart handle until her knuckles turned white. "And to think Thomas Andrews acts all high and mighty at church?" the second woman scoffed. "All that talk about community and family values. Guess it doesn't apply to his precious profit margins." The voices moved away, but their words echoed in Grace's mind. She mechanically finished her shopping, hardly seeing the items she placed in her cart. At the checkout, she barely registered the total, mechanically handing over her carefully counted cash. The drive home was a blur. Noah chatted about his day from the back seat, but Grace could only manage absent-minded, in response. Her mind kept returning to Mr. Andrews. His gentle smile. His kindness to Noah. The way he defended her dignity that day in the diner. How could that same man be behind such heartless decisions? Later that evening, the bell above the diner door chimed as Grace entered for her evening shift. Mr. Andrews was there, as he often was nowadays, sitting at his usual spot at the counter. His face brightened when he saw her. "Grace, I was hoping you'd be working tonight." He smiled warmly, but something in his expression faltered when she didn't return it with her usual warmth. "Good evening, Mr. Andrews." Her voice was perfectly polite but distant. She busied herself with arranging menus, avoiding his eyes. "Is everything all right?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "Everything's fine." She moved behind the counter, maintaining a careful physical distance. "Can I get you your usual coffee?" "Please." He watched her movements, noting how she no longer lingered to chat as she poured his coffee. "Grace, if something's bothering you..." "Will that be all, sir?" She cut him off gently but firmly. her professional smile never reaching her eyes. Throughout her shift, she maintained that polite distance. When he tried to engage her in conversation, she responded with short, courteous answers before finding reasons to attend to other customers. Each time she passed him, she felt his confused, hurt glances, but she couldn't bring herself to meet his eyes. Other regulars noticed the change too. Mary, the other waitress, shot questioning looks between them. The usual warm atmosphere of their interactions had frozen over, replaced by an Arctic chill that seemed to lower the temperature of the entire diner. Mr. Andrews stayed longer than usual, nursing his coffee, trying to catch her eye. But Grace had perfected the art of professional invisibility, present enough to refill his cup when needed, absent enough to avoid any real connection. Finally, after 2 hours of this careful dance, he stood to leave. He placed his payment on the counter, including his usual generous tip. Grace saw him hesitate, his hand lingering on the bills as if hoping she would say something, anything, to break this strange new wall between them. "Have a good evening, Mr. Andrews," she said quietly, still not meeting his gaze. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. "Good night, Grace," he replied softly, his voice carrying a weight of confusion and hurt that made her heart ache despite herself. The bell chimed again as he left. Grace watched through the window as he walked to his car, his shoulders slightly slumped, looking older than she'd ever seen him. He sat in his vehicle for a long moment before starting the engine, his silhouette visible in the glow of the streetlight. As his car pulled away from the curb, Grace finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of her disappointment. She'd begun to believe in him, to trust in the possibility of something real and good. But now that trust felt like a foolish dream. She mechanically wiped down the counter where he'd sat, erasing the coffee rings his cup had left behind. "What happened between you two?" Mary asked, coming to stand beside her. "I've never seen him look so lost." Grace shook her head, unable to voice the complicated mix of emotions churning inside her. How could she explain that the man who'd shown her such kindness was the same one whose decisions were destroying lives like hers? That every gentle word from him now felt like a contradiction? The rest of her shift passed in a blur of coffee refills and dinner orders. When she finally clocked out, the night air had turned chilly. She pulled her thin jacket closer around her shoulders, thinking of Sarah Mitchell and Jenny from accounting, wondering how they would manage to keep their children warm this winter. Meanwhile, Mr. Andrews' car moved slowly through the darkened streets of town. His usual route home seemed longer tonight, each traffic light holding him suspended in thoughts of Grace's changed behavior. The warmth that had been growing between them had vanished so suddenly, replaced by a professional coldness that felt worse than outright rejection. "What did I do wrong?" he whispered to his empty car, his words disappearing into the darkness. The question hung unanswered in the night air as his headlights cut through the darkness, leading him home to his empty house where no one waited to hear about his day, where no child's laughter echoed in the halls, where Grace's sudden distance felt like a door closing on possibilities he'd only just begun to imagine. Grace sat at her small kitchen table, staring at Noah's school play flyer. Her son had been practicing his 3 lines as tree number 2 for weeks, twisting his arms into branches and swaying back and forth until he got dizzy. The elementary school's production of The Giving Forest wasn't exactly Broadway, but to Noah, it might as well have been. "Mommy, can Mr. Andrews come?" Noah asked for the 3rd time that morning, his breakfast barely touched. "Please? He promised to teach me how to make my branches look real." Grace smoothed the wrinkled paper with trembling fingers. The past few days had been a whirlwind of emotions. Every time she thought about Mr. Andrews' kindness, his gentle smile, his patience with Noah, her heart warmed. But then Linda's words would echo in her mind about the single mothers being fired, and that warmth would turn to ice. "I don't know, sweetie," she said, watching Noah's face fall. "Mr. Andrews is a very busy man." "But he said he'd come if we invited him." Noah's lower lip quivered. "He pinky promised when we had dinner at his house." Grace remembered that evening, the photos of his family, the way he'd listened to Noah's endless stories about school with genuine interest. It hadn't felt fake. None of it had. She picked up her phone, turning it over in her hands. The school play was tomorrow night. It wasn't fair to punish Noah for her own confusion about Mr. Andrews. "Okay," she said finally, dialing his number before she could change her mind. Her heart pounded as the phone rang. "Grace?" His voice was warm, surprised. "Is everything all right?" Yes, She cleared her throat. Noah's school play is tomorrow night. He's playing a tree, and he'd really like you to come. If you're not too busy. What time? The immediate response caught her off guard. 7 o'clock at Lincoln Elementary. I'll be there. No hesitation. No checking a calendar or making excuses. The next evening, Grace helped Noah pin his brown felt costume together in the school gymnasium. Other parents rushed around, adjusting cardboard props and butterfly wings. Do you think he'll really come? Noah whispered, fidgeting with his tree branches. We'll see, honey. Grace kept her voice neutral, not wanting to promise anything. 20 minutes before showtime, she peeked through the curtain at the filling auditorium. Her heart skipped when she spotted Mr. Andrews in the third row wearing a suit and tie, holding a small bouquet of flowers. He'd arrived early. He's here, she told Noah, whose face lit up like Christmas morning. Really? Can I see? She lifted him slightly so he could peek. Mr. Andrews caught sight of them and waved, making Noah giggle. The play was exactly what you'd expect from a group of second graders. Forgotten lines, crooked costumes, and more than one child waving to their parents mid-scene. But every time Noah delivered his lines about sharing his branches with tired birds, Mr. Andrews beamed and clapped as if watching a professional performance. When Noah swayed his branches in the final dance number, Mr. Andrews's bravo rang out above all other voices. Grace found herself smiling despite her reservations. After the show, Noah broke free from the group of children and ran straight to Mr. Andrews, who knelt down to receive the boy's enthusiastic hug. Did you see me? Did you see how I moved my branches just like you showed me? Noah's words tumbled out in excitement. You are the finest tree I've ever seen, mister, Andrews said, presenting Noah with the flowers. These are for you, young man. Every great actor deserves flowers after a performance. Noah buried his face in the bouquet, then looked up at Mr. Andrews with shining eyes. Thank you, Grandpa. The word hung in the air. Grace's breath caught. She waited for Mr. Andrews to correct Noah, to show discomfort at such an intimate title. Instead, his eyes grew misty, and he pulled Noah into another hug. You're very welcome, son. Other parents milled around, taking photos and congratulating their children, but Grace stood rooted to the spot, watching Mr. Andrews help Noah remove his tree costume, listening patiently as her son explained every detail of the performance. The drive home was filled with Noah's chatter about how Mr. Andrews had promised to come to all his future plays and maybe even teach him to fish on the weekend. Grace nodded and smiled, but her mind was a turbulent sea of emotions. Later that night, after tucking an exhausted but happy Noah into bed, Grace lay awake in her own room. The moonlight filtered through her thin curtains, casting shadows on the wall that seemed to dance like Noah's tree branches. Mr. Andrews had been so genuine tonight. The way he'd shown up early, dressed up for a simple school play, the tears in his eyes when Noah called him Grandpa, the gentle way he listened to every word her son said. It didn't match with the image of a heartless businessman firing single mothers. She rolled onto her side, clutching her pillow. The flowers he'd brought Noah sat in a vase on their kitchen table. Nothing fancy, just simple daisies and carnations. But he'd thought to bring them. It was the kind of detail that showed he understood children, understood what would make a little boy feel special. But then there was Linda's voice in her head, telling her about Sarah Mitchell losing her job. Sarah, who had 3 kids and was already struggling to make ends meet. How could the same man who brought flowers to a child's school play be responsible for causing such pain to other families? Grace stared at the ceiling, her heart heavy with the weight of contradiction. The man who had defended her dignity that day in the diner, who had become such a steady presence in their lives, who made Noah's eyes light up with joy. Could she trust him? Or was this all too good to be true? Sleep eluded her as she tossed and turned, torn between gratitude for the happiness Mr. Andrews brought to Noah's life and the gnawing suspicion about his company's actions. The gentle ticking of her bedside clock marked the passing minutes as she wrestled with her thoughts, unable to reconcile the 2 versions of Thomas Andrews that existed in her mind. The church basement buzzed with conversation as families gathered for the monthly community dinner. Folding tables draped in simple white cloths formed neat rows, laden with steaming casseroles and homemade dishes. The familiar scent of coffee and fresh-baked rolls filled the air. Grace hesitated at the entrance, one hand clutching Noah's smaller one. Her son bounced excitedly beside her, already eyeing the dessert table with its array of pies and cookies. She smoothed her second-hand blue dress self-consciously, wondering if she should have stayed home instead. "Look, Mommy, Mrs. Peterson made her famous mac and cheese." Noah tugged at her hand, pointing toward a large ceramic dish. His enthusiasm drew a few warm smiles from nearby churchgoers. "Okay, sweetie, let's find seats first," Grace said softly, scanning the room. She spotted a half-empty table near the back and steered them toward it, hoping to remain inconspicuous. They had barely settled into their chairs when Noah waved enthusiastically. "Mr. Andrews! Over here!" Grace's heart skipped as she saw Thomas Andrews making his way through the crowd. He wore a navy sweater that somehow made him look both distinguished and approachable. His silver hair caught the fluorescent lights as he smiled and nodded to various congregants. "Noah, Grace," he greeted them warmly, taking the seat across from them. "I'm glad you could make it tonight." Noah immediately launched into a detailed description of his upcoming role as Tree Number 2, complete with arm demonstrations. Mr. Andrews listened with genuine interest, asking questions that made Noah beam with pride. Grace found herself relaxing despite her earlier reservations. The casual chatter around them, the warmth of the room, and Noah's obvious joy created a comfortable atmosphere she hadn't expected. As people finished their main courses, Pastor Matthews stepped up to the microphone at the front of the room. "Before we move on to dessert, Mr. Andrews has asked to say a few words." Grace's fork paused halfway to her mouth. She watched as Mr. Andrews stood and made his way to the front, his presence commanding attention without demanding it. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "You know, I've been part of this community for over 40 years, and I've seen a lot of changes. But tonight, I want to talk about someone who's taught me more about strength and dignity in a few weeks than I've learned in all those years." Grace's cheeks warmed as Mr. Andrews' gaze found hers across the room. "We have among us tonight a woman who embodies everything that makes our community special. Grace Miller works multiple jobs, raises an extraordinary young man, and does it all with grace, pun intended." A gentle ripple of laughter spread through the room. "But what truly sets her apart isn't just her hard work or dedication. It's her unwavering spirit, her ability to hold her head high despite life's challenges. Women like her hold up the world, though too often they go unrecognized." The room had grown completely still, all eyes now on Grace. She felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes as Mr. Andrews continued. "In a world quick to judge, Grace shows us what real strength looks like. She reminds us that being a parent, single or otherwise, is perhaps the most important job any of us could have, and she does it beautifully." Noah squeezed her hand under the table, his face glowing with pride. "That's you, Mommy," he whispered loudly. "So tonight I want to thank Grace Miller for teaching me, teaching all of us, about dignity, resilience, and love." Mr. Andrews raised his water glass. "To Grace." The room erupted in applause. Mrs. Peterson from the choir wiped tears from her eyes. The Johnson family, who had always been a bit standoffish, smiled warmly in Grace's direction. Even old Mr. Wilson, known for his grumpiness, joined in the clapping. Grace sat stunned, overwhelmed by the sudden outpouring of support. Women she barely knew came up to hug her. Others shared their own stories of single parenthood or difficult times. The walls she'd built around herself began to crack, letting in warmth she'd forgotten existed. Later, as people helped clean up, Mr. Andrews approached their table again. "I meant every word," he said quietly. Grace struggled to find her voice. "Thank you," she managed. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything." His eyes crinkled with genuine affection. "Just keep being you." As they gathered their things to leave, the entire room felt different. The same basement that had seemed intimidating hours ago now felt like a place where she belonged. Outside, the evening air was crisp and clean. Stars dotted the dark sky above as Grace and Noah began their walk home. The streetlights cast warm pools of light on the sidewalk, and Noah skipped through each one, still buzzing with excitement. "Did you hear what Mr. Andrews said about you, Mommy?" Everyone was clapping. "I heard, sweetheart." Grace squeezed his small hand, her heart full. Noah looked up at her, his face serious in the lamplight. "He's right, you know. You're the strongest person ever." Grace felt tears threatening again. She pulled Noah close as they walked, their shadows merging on the pavement. The night air carried the faint scent of blooming jasmine from nearby gardens, and the world seemed full of possibility. "Maybe this is real," she whispered, more to herself than to Noah. For the first time in years, hope didn't feel like a dangerous thing to hold on to. Their footsteps echoed softly through the quiet neighborhood as they made their way home, the evening's warmth still glowing in their hearts. The simple act of walking hand in hand with her son, after such a profound moment of recognition, felt like a gift Grace had never expected to receive. The late afternoon sun streamed through Grace's kitchen window as she stirred a pot of mac and cheese, Noah's favorite comfort food. Her thoughts drifted to Mr. Andrews's words at the community dinner 2 nights ago, still warming her heart despite her lingering doubts. The screen door suddenly burst open with a bang. Linda stormed in, mascara streaking down her flushed cheeks, clutching her purse like a shield. Grace's wooden spoon clattered against the stovetop as she rushed to her friend. "Linda, what happened?" Linda collapsed into a kitchen chair, her shoulders shaking. "They fired me, Grace. Just like that 15 years of service gone." She pulled a crumpled tissue from her purse. "And I'm not the only one. Sarah from accounting, Maria from reception, all single moms. They're targeting us." Grace's blood ran cold. She lowered herself into the chair beside Linda, her legs suddenly weak. "What do you mean, targeting?" "The board approved it yesterday." Linda's voice cracked. "They're cutting costs by eliminating high-risk employees. That's what they're calling us. Single mothers who might need time off for sick kids or school emergencies." She laughed bitterly. "As if being a good mother makes us bad employees." Grace's hands trembled as she poured Linda a glass of water. "But Mr. Andrews, he just stood up at church and praised single mothers. He said we hold up the world." "Pretty words." Linda dabbed at her eyes. "But where was that support when the board voted? He signed off on every termination letter personally." The glass slipped from Grace's fingers, water splashing across the linoleum. Her mind raced through every moment the gentle way he'd comforted her after that horrible date, his kindness to Noah, the warmth in his eyes when he spoke about family. Had it all been an act? "I have to see him," Grace said, her voice hardening. "Now." "Grace, don't." But Grace was already grabbing her keys, her heart pounding with betrayal and rage. "Stay with Noah, please. I won't be long." The drive to Mr. Andrews's office felt endless. Each mile fueled her anger, memories of his supposed kindness now tasting like ash. The security guard recognized her and waved her through. Mr. Andrews had put her on the approved visitor list weeks ago. Another false gesture of trust. She found him in his office, silver head bent over paperwork. He looked up with a smile that quickly faded when he saw her expression. "Grace, what's wrong?" "How dare you?" Her voice shook. "How dare you stand in that church and praise single mothers while signing orders to destroy their lives?" Mr. Andrews's face fell. He stood slowly, spreading his hands. "Grace, please let me explain. The board—" "Don't," she cut him off. "Linda just lost her job. 15 years of dedication thrown away because she's a single mother. And you approved it. The decision wasn't mine," he protested, moving around his desk. "The board voted, and you just went along with it?" Grace's laugh was hollow. "Your words mean nothing if you let this happen. All those beautiful speeches about family and dignity, they were just empty promises. Grace, please." He reached for her arm, but she jerked away. "Don't touch me." Tears burned in her eyes. "I actually believed in you. I let Noah believe in you. We trusted you. I never meant to hurt anyone," Mr. Andrews said softly. "Sometimes as CEO, there are decisions." "Decisions?" Grace's voice rose. "These aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. These are real women, real children. Linda has 2 kids in college. Maria's daughter needs surgery next month. But I guess their families don't matter as much as your profit margins." Mr. Andrews's face paled. "That's not fair." "No. What's not fair is pretending to care about single mothers while systematically destroying their lives." Grace backed toward the door. "At least that first blind date was honest about his contempt. You're worse. You hide yours behind kind smiles and empty words." She turned and fled, ignoring his calls after her. The drive home passed in a blur of tears and bitter disappointment. When she finally reached her front door, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely fit the key in the lock. Linda had already put Noah to bed. Grace whispered a hoarse thank you as her friend hugged her goodbye. Then she was alone in the quiet house, the weight of betrayal crushing her chest. She crept into Noah's room, breathing in the familiar scent of his favorite dinosaur sheets. His small face was peaceful in sleep, innocent of the cruelties of the adult world. Grace grabbed his pillow from the floor where it had fallen and pressed it to her face, muffling her sobs. "Never again," she whispered into the soft fabric. "I'll never trust a man again." Through her tears, she could still hear Mr. Andrews's voice at the community dinner. Women like her hold up the world. But now she knew the truth in his world. Women like her were disposable. Their strength, nothing more than a convenient story to tell at church dinners. Grace curled up on Noah's floor, clutching his pillow, and let the tears flow freely. Tomorrow she would be strong again, for Noah's sake. But tonight, she allowed herself to mourn the death of hope. The grandfather clock in Mr. Andrews's study ticked steadily through the evening silence. He sat in his worn leather chair, a cup of chamomile tea growing cold on the mahogany desk before him. The study walls, lined with dark wooden bookshelves, seemed to close in around him as he stared at the silver-framed photograph of Margaret, his late wife. Her smile, captured in that moment years ago, still had the power to pierce his heart. Her kind eyes sparkled with the same warmth he'd fallen in love with 40 years before. The picture had been taken at their favorite spot in the garden, where Margaret had spent countless hours tending to her beloved roses. "What would you say to me now, my dear?" he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. His fingers traced the edge of the frame, remembering how she would cup his face in her hands whenever he faced a difficult decision. Margaret had always been his moral compass. "Thomas," she would say, her voice gentle but firm, "always fight for the right thing. Money comes and goes, but your integrity, that's forever." The weight of Grace's words from earlier that day pressed heavily on his conscience. "Your words mean nothing if you let this happen." She was right, of course. He'd allowed himself to become complacent, to hide behind board decisions and profit margins while forgetting the faces of the people those decisions affected. Mr. Andrews set down the photograph and walked to the window. The evening sky had turned a deep purple, stars beginning to peek through the gathering darkness. He thought of Noah's innocent face, of Grace's proud determination to give her son a better life. How many other mothers like her were out there, fighting the same battle? His tea had gone completely cold now, forgotten like the principles he'd once held dear. Margaret would have been disappointed in him. She had always taught their children that true leadership meant protecting those who needed it most. "I've lost my way, Margaret," he murmured, returning to his desk. "I've become exactly what you warned me against. Someone who chooses the easy path over the right one." For the first time in years, Thomas Andrews felt the overwhelming need to pray. He lowered himself to his knees beside his chair, something he hadn't done since Margaret's passing. His hands, usually so steady in business meetings, trembled as he clasped them together. "Lord," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I don't deserve to ask for anything. I've failed to protect those who needed protection. I've allowed myself to become blind to the struggles of others." Tears formed in his eyes as he continued. Margaret always knew what was right. She would be so disappointed in me now. These women, these mothers, they're fighting battles I can't even imagine. And instead of helping them, I've made their lives harder. His voice grew stronger as he spoke, even as it shook with emotion. "I need your guidance. Give me the wisdom to see the right path, and the courage to walk it. Help me become the man Margaret always believed I could be." The grandfather clock continued its steady rhythm as Mr. Andrews remained on his knees, feeling both humbled and strengthened by this moment of brutal honesty with himself and with God. "Lord," he whispered, his lips trembling, "give me the strength to make this right." The morning sun painted long shadows across Grace's kitchen as she packed Noah's lunch. Her movements were mechanical, spreading peanut butter and jelly on wheat bread like she had done hundreds of times before. But today, like every day this past week, her mind wandered to the diner she was trying so hard to forget. She closed Noah's Batman lunchbox with a snap that echoed in the quiet kitchen. Her son sat at their small table, pushing his cereal around with his spoon, his usually bright face clouded with confusion. "Mommy," Noah said, his voice small, "can we go see Grandpa Andrews today?" Grace's hand trembled as she wiped down the counter. "No, sweetie. We're going to try that new store across town today." "But why?" Noah's lower lip quivered. "I miss him. He always gives me extra chocolate milk." Grace turned away, busying herself with the dishes in the sink. The warm water couldn't wash away the ache in her chest. "Sometimes, honey, people aren't who we think they are." The bus ride across town took 45 minutes. Grace stared out the window, watching familiar streets give way to unknown neighborhoods. Noah pressed his face against the glass, pointing at dogs and fire trucks, but his enthusiasm seemed forced. At the grocery store, Grace pushed their cart down unfamiliar aisles. Everything cost more here, and the fluorescent lights were harsh compared to the warm glow of the diner. She found herself reaching for items Mr. Andrews used to recommend. His favorite brand of coffee, the cookies he always saved for Noah. Each time she pulled her hand back as if burned. "Look, Mommy," Noah exclaimed, pointing at a display of maple syrup. "That's the kind Grandpa Andrews puts on my pancakes." Grace's throat tightened. "We don't need syrup today, sweetheart." An elderly woman nearby smiled at Noah. "Such a sweet boy. Is your grandpa waiting at home?" "No," Noah said sadly. "Mommy won't let me see him anymore." Grace felt her cheeks burn as she hurried Noah away from the woman's puzzled look. In the produce section, she fumbled with selecting apples, her vision blurring with unshed tears. That evening, after serving Noah dinner, sandwiches again because she couldn't bring herself to cook, Grace sat alone at the kitchen table. Bills spread before her like a paper maze of worry. The electric bill was higher than usual, and without her friend Linda's occasional childcare help, Linda, who'd lost her job because of Mr. Andrews's company, she'd have to pay more for after-school care. "Mommy?" Noah appeared in his pajamas, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. "Can you tell me the story about when Grandpa Andrews taught me to fish?" Grace's heart clenched. "Not tonight, honey. Time for bed." "But you always tell me stories." Noah's voice rose. "I want Grandpa Andrews. He tells the best stories." "Noah, please," Grace said, her voice cracking. "Go to bed." Noah burst into tears and ran to his room. The sound of his door slamming felt like a physical blow. Grace pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to hold back her own tears. She thought about the church dinner, how proud she'd felt when Mr. Andrews praised her in front of everyone. How safe she'd felt when he sat beside her at the picnic. How his eyes crinkled when he smiled at Noah. All lies, she told herself. Just pretty words, while his company destroyed lives. The next morning, Grace took an even longer route to work, adding an extra transfer just to avoid passing the diner. Her cleaning supplies felt heavier than usual as she trudged up the steps to her first client's house. Every movement was weighted with exhaustion and disappointment. During her lunch break, she saw a silver-haired man walking down the street and ducked into a doorway, heart pounding. It wasn't him, just another elderly gentleman, but the fear of running into Mr. Andrews made her hands shake. That night, after tucking a still sulking Noah into bed, Grace finally allowed herself to cry. She curled up on her bed, still fully dressed, and let the tears flow freely. The betrayal felt fresh and raw, like a wound that wouldn't heal. Her phone buzzed. Another missed call from Mr. Andrews. She'd stopped counting how many times he'd tried to reach her. Each attempt only reinforced her decision to stay away. What explanation could possibly justify what his company had done? Rolling onto her side, Grace pulled her knees to her chest and whispered into the darkness, "Better lonely than lied to." The words tasted bitter, but she forced herself to believe them. She'd survived on her own before. She could do it again. The moonlight filtered through her thin curtains, casting shadows on the wall. Grace watched them dance, remembering how Mr. Andrews had once fixed those curtains when they'd fallen down. Another kind gesture that meant nothing now. Noah's dinosaur nightlight glowed softly in the hallway, a gift from Mr. Andrews after the school play. Grace closed her eyes tightly, wishing she could erase every memory of his kindness. It would be easier if he'd been cruel from the start. The clock on her bedside table ticked away the minutes. Tomorrow would be another day of long bus rides and avoiding familiar places. Another day of answering Noah's questions with half-truths. Another day of pretending her heart wasn't breaking all over again. "Better lonely than lied to," she whispered once more, trying to convince herself that the words were true, even as tears dampened her pillow and sleep remained stubbornly out of reach. Mr. Thomas Andrews straightened his tie as he strode into the company's glass-walled conference room. Morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating the concerned faces of board members already seated around the long mahogany table. Their murmurs died as he entered. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. He remained standing, hands resting on the back of his chair. The weight of what he was about to do pressed down on his shoulders like a heavy coat. Board member Richard Maxwell cleared his throat. Thomas, this is highly irregular. We already voted on the layoffs. Yes, we did. Mr. Andrews pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the table. And we were wrong. A ripple of whispers circulated around the room. Sarah Chen, the youngest board member, leaned forward with interest. I've spent the past week reviewing our financials, Mr. Andrews continued. He began distributing papers from his folder. The cuts targeting single mothers weren't just morally questionable, they were financially short-sighted. Now see here, Maxwell interrupted, his face reddening. We discussed this extensively. The numbers don't lie. Actually, Richard, they do. Mr. Andrews tapped the documents he'd handed out. These women aren't just employees. They're the backbone of our customer service department. Their retention rates are higher. Their customer satisfaction scores exceed company averages. Firing them would save money in the short term, but cost us dearly in experience and quality. Harold Thompson, the CFO, adjusted his glasses as he studied the papers. These projections are interesting, Thomas, but where would we find the money to keep them? Mr. Andrews smiled. This was the opening he'd been waiting for. I'm glad you asked. He clicked a remote, and the wall screen lit up with charts. First, we cut the executive bonus program by 30%. Gasps and protests erupted around the table. Maxwell's face turned purple. That's outrageous, is it? Mr. Andrews's voice carried a sharp edge. More outrageous than firing dedicated employees who are raising the next generation alone? More outrageous than destroying families to pad our profit margins? This is business, not charity, Maxwell shot back. No, this is about who we are as a company. Mr. Andrews looked each board member in the eye. I've been visiting our branches, talking to employees. These single mothers work harder than anyone. They're first to arrive, last to leave. They skip lunches to make deadlines. They're not asking for charity. They're asking for the chance to earn their living with dignity. Sarah Chen nodded slowly. He's right. My own mother was a single parent. She worked 3 jobs to put me through college. Mr. Andrews gestured to his next slide. Beyond the bonus cuts, I've identified redundancies in our administrative structure. Streamlining upper management would save another 15%. Combined with a slight reduction in our marketing budget, we can maintain our workforce without significantly impacting our bottom line. The shareholders won't like this, Thompson warned. Perhaps not initially, Mr. Andrews agreed. But I've already spoken with several major investors. They understand that sustainable growth requires stable, experienced employees. Our reputation matters. Maxwell stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. This is emotional manipulation, Thomas. You're letting personal feelings cloud your judgment. No, Richard. For the first time in years, I'm seeing clearly. Mr. Andrews's voice grew quiet but firm. If this board refuses to reinstate these women, I'll resign as CEO. Immediately. The silence that followed was deafening. Board members exchanged shocked glances. You can't be serious, Maxwell sputtered. I've never been more serious. Mr. Andrews pulled out one final document. I've already drafted my resignation letter. And I should mention, the local press is very interested in this story, particularly in how a company that claims to value family is systematically targeting single mothers. Sarah Chen broke into a slow smile. I second Mr. Andrews's proposal. Thompson sighed heavily. The numbers do support his argument, assuming these projections are accurate. One by one, other board members began nodding. Maxwell remained standing, face flushed with anger. This is blackmail, he hissed. This is leadership, Mr. Andrews corrected. Now, shall we vote? The next 15 minutes were tense as each member cast their vote. When the final tally was counted, Mr. Andrews's proposal had passed by a narrow margin. He felt his shoulders relax for the first time in days. I'll have HR begin calling our employees immediately, he said. They'll all be reinstated with back pay and a formal apology. As the board members filed out, some congratulatory, others still grumbling, Sarah Chen paused by his chair. That was brave, she said softly, and long overdue. Mr. Andrews gathered his papers, his hands trembling slightly from leftover adrenaline. Sometimes it takes meeting the right person to help you find your courage. Alone in the conference room, He walked to the window and looked out over the city. Somewhere out there, Grace was probably still angry with him, still hurt. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, whispering, "Now, to win back her trust." The company's main auditorium buzzed with nervous energy. Rows of uncomfortable employees filled the seats, their whispers echoing off the high ceiling. Near the back, Grace sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. Linda, recently fired, sat beside her, both women drawn here by a mysterious, company-wide email. The overhead lights dimmed, and Mr. Andrews stepped onto the small stage. His silver hair caught the spotlight, but his usual confident stance seemed different today, more humble, more human. He adjusted the microphone, clearing his throat. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice warm but serious. "I've called this meeting because our company needs to address a grave mistake, one that goes against everything I personally believe in, and everything this company should stand for." The room fell silent. Grace felt her heart beating faster. Last week, our board approved layoffs targeting single parents, predominantly single mothers. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Today, I'm here to announce that decision has been reversed. Every single parent who was let go will be offered their position back, with back pay and a formal apology." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Linda grabbed Grace's hand, squeezing it tight. "But that's not all, mister," Andrews continued. "We're implementing new company policies, effective immediately. We're establishing flexible work hours for parents with young children. We're creating an on-site daycare facility. And most importantly, we're adding specific protections in our employment contracts to prevent discrimination against single parents." He stepped away from the podium, walking to the edge of the stage. His eyes scanned the crowd, and for a brief moment, they met Grace's. You might wonder what prompted these changes. The truth is, it took one person's courage to open my eyes. One woman who dared to tell me that fine words mean nothing without actions to back them up. Grace felt her cheeks flush as several heads turned in her direction. She hadn't expected this. She showed me that being a leader isn't about profit margins or stockholder satisfaction. It's about people. It's about families. It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard. "Mr." Andrews' voice grew thick with emotion. She helped me remember something my late wife always said. The measure of a man isn't in his wallet, but in his heart. Linda squeezed Grace's hand again as tears rolled down her cheeks. Mr. Andrews returned to the podium.
To all the single parents in this room, you are not just employees, you are heroes.
Every day, you carry double the load, face double the challenges, and still show up here giving your best. From today forward, this company will honor that dedication. He pulled out a sheet of paper. "I have here my own signed pledge. If these new policies are ever reversed, I will immediately resign as CEO. This isn't just a corporate decision. It's my personal promise to each of you." The auditorium erupted in applause. People stood, cheering. Linda hugged Grace tightly, sobbing with joy. "We're getting our jobs back," she whispered. Grace sat still, overwhelmed by emotion. She watched as Mr. Andrews stepped down from the stage, immediately surrounded by grateful employees. His eyes found hers again across the crowd, and he gave her a small, gentle nod. As the meeting dispersed, people lingered in small groups, talking excitedly about the announcements. Grace waited by the exit, gathering her thoughts. Noah would be getting out of school soon, and she needed to pick him up. Outside, the afternoon sun warmed her face. She walked slowly, her mind replaying Mr. Andrews' words. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen, not just as a single mother struggling to get by, but as someone whose voice mattered, whose courage could make a difference. The familiar route home seemed different somehow. The same trees lined the sidewalk, the same cars passed by, but everything felt lighter. Noah skipped beside her, chattering about his day at school, unaware of the momentous changes that had just occurred. "Mommy, why are you smiling so much?" Noah asked, swinging their joined hands. Grace squeezed his small hand, her heart full of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Real, solid hope. Not just for herself, but for Linda and all the other single mothers who would benefit from today's changes. Sometimes, she realized, standing up for what you believe in really could make a difference. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across their path as they walked home together, mother and son, their footsteps in sync. The weight that had been pressing on Grace's shoulders for so long felt just a little bit lighter with each step. The evening sun cast long shadows across Grace's small front porch as 3 gentle knocks echoed through her modest home. She froze at the kitchen sink, soap suds dripping from her hands. Through the window, she could see Mr. Andrews standing there, his silver hair neatly combed, wearing a simple blue sweater instead of his usual business suit. Noah looked up from his homework at the dining table. "Is that Grandpa Andrews?" "Honey, please go finish your math in your room," Grace said softly, drying her hands on a worn dish towel. Her heart raced as she approached the door, each step heavy with uncertainty. She opened the door just enough to see him clearly. Mr. Andrews stood with his hands clasped in front of him, looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. The confident businessman was gone, replaced by someone who reminded her of a nervous schoolboy. "Grace," he said, his voice gentle. "May I come in, please?" She hesitated, one hand still gripping the doorknob. The memory of Linda's tears still stung fresh in her mind, but there was something different in his eyes now, a quiet determination that made her pause. "5 minutes," she said, stepping aside to let him enter. Mr. Andrews walked into her small living room, taking in the carefully mended curtains and the neatly arranged second-hand furniture. His eyes lingered on Noah's crayon drawings, proudly displayed on the refrigerator. "Would you like to sit?" Grace gestured to the old plaid couch, maintaining a careful distance between them as she perched on the edge of her favorite armchair. "Thank you." He sat down, running his palms over his knees. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, Grace, about my company, about my choices, about everything." Grace stayed silent, watching him struggle to find the right words. "I've been blind," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "For years, I've sat in my office, signing papers, making decisions that affected people's lives without really seeing them, without understanding." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "When Linda came to you crying, when you confronted me, it hit me hard. I realized I'd become exactly what I never wanted to be, someone who values profits over people." Grace's fingers twisted in her lap. "Those women you fired, Mr. Andrews, they're just like me, single mothers trying their best to provide for their children." "I know," he nodded, pain evident in his expression. "My late wife, Margaret, she used to volunteer at a women's shelter. She'd come home and tell me stories about single mothers fighting against impossible odds. I'd listen, but I never really understood. Not until I met you." He pulled out a folded paper from his pocket. "This morning, I called an emergency board meeting. Every single mother who was laid off has been offered their job back, with back pay and improved benefits." He handed her the paper, a copy of the new company policy. Grace's hands trembled as she read it. Protected leave for family emergencies, flexible scheduling for parent-teacher conferences, on-site childcare options. "I don't expect forgiveness, Grace," Mr. Andrews said quietly. "I don't deserve it. What I'm asking for is a chance to prove that I've changed, to show you that I can be the man you and Noah thought I was." Grace set the paper aside, studying his face. The sincerity in his eyes reminded her of that first day in the diner, when he'd shown kindness to a heartbroken stranger. "You hurt a lot of people," she said softly. "I did," he nodded. "And I'll spend every day trying to make it right." "Why?" Grace asked. "Why go against your board? Risk your position?" Mr. Andrews smiled sadly. "Because you taught me something important, Grace. You showed me that true strength isn't in power or profit. It's in standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Noah's footsteps creaked overhead, reminding Grace of his presence upstairs. She thought about how Mr. Andrews had always treated her son with genuine warmth, how Noah's eyes lit up whenever Grandpa Andrews was mentioned. "I miss our talks," Mr. Andrews admitted. "I miss Noah's stories about school. I miss—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I miss being part of your lives." Grace stood up and walked to the window, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the sky in soft oranges and pinks. Her mind went back to all the moments: the church picnic, the school play, the quiet conversations over coffee at the diner. She thought about how it felt to be seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. Turning back to face him, she spoke softly but firmly. Actions speak louder than words. We'll see. The words hung between them. Not quite a rejection, not quite forgiveness, but perhaps something more valuable. Possibility. The familiar bell above Joe's diner chimed as Grace pushed open the door, her hand clasped tightly in Noah's. The evening air had turned crisp, and the warmth from inside wrapped around them like a soft blanket. The same red vinyl booths lined the walls, the same checkered floor stretched before them. But something felt different tonight. Mr. Andrews stood near the counter, his silver hair catching the warm glow of the overhead lights. He'd closed the diner early just like that first terrible night, but this time, familiar faces from the community filled the booths. Linda sat with her children, restored to her job and smiling. Other single mothers from the company were there too, their eyes bright with renewed dignity. Grandpa Andrews! Noah broke free from Grace's grip and ran to him. Grace's heart squeezed as Mr. Andrews scooped Noah up in a bear hug. She'd seen that gesture dozens of times now, but it still moved her the way this distinguished businessman would drop everything to embrace a child. Right this way, Mr. Andrews said, gesturing to the same booth where Grace had faced such cruelty weeks ago. But now, someone had decorated it with a small vase of wildflowers, the kind that grew in her tiny backyard garden. Grace slid into the booth, smoothing her simple blue dress. She bought it secondhand, just like before, but this time she wore it with pride rather than uncertainty. Noah bounced beside her, immediately reaching for the kids' menu and crayons Mr. Andrews had set out. The usual for everyone? Sarah, their regular waitress, asked with a warm smile. Chocolate milk for the artist? Coffee for Mom? And Earl Grey for the boss? Mr. Andrews nodded, but his eyes never left Grace's face. There was something in his expression, a mixture of nervousness and determination, that made Grace's pulse quicken. As they waited for their drinks, the diner hummed with quiet conversation. Grace noticed how different the atmosphere felt from that first night. Instead of judgmental whispers, there was a sense of community, of belonging. Grace, Mr. Andrews began, his voice steady but gentle. I asked you here tonight because this place holds significance for both of us. It's where I first saw your strength, even if it was born from a moment of cruelty. Noah looked up from his coloring, sensing the importance of the moment. The conversations around them gradually quieted. That night a fool walked out on you because he couldn't see your worth. Mr. Andrews continued. He saw your status as a single mother as something shameful. But he was wrong, so terribly wrong. Grace's throat tightened as memories of that humiliation surfaced. But this time, they didn't bring shame. They reminded her of how far she'd come. Mr. Andrews stood slowly, his presence commanding yet humble. Everyone here tonight knows your story, Grace. They've seen how you work 3 jobs to give Noah the best life possible. They've watched you hold your head high despite judgment. They've witnessed your courage in standing up for what's right, even when it meant standing up to me. Tears pricked at Grace's eyes as she noticed Linda nodding, other single mothers wiping their own eyes. You see, that man's words that night, single moms disgust me. They represent everything wrong with how society often views strong women like you. Mr. Andrews' voice grew passionate. But I stand here today to say something different. He moved from behind the table, and to Grace's surprise, lowered himself to one knee beside their booth, not in proposal, but in a gesture of profound respect that made her breath catch. Single moms don't disgust me, he declared, his voice carrying through the hushed diner. They inspire me. You inspire me, Grace Miller. The diner erupted in applause. Noah beamed, proud of his mother without fully understanding why. Linda led a standing ovation, tears streaming down her cheeks. Grace's own tears fell freely now, but these were different from the ones she'd shed in this same booth weeks ago. These were tears of healing, of recognition, of being truly seen. Let me walk this journey with you, Mr. Andrews said softly, taking her hand in his. Not as a savior or a solution, but as someone who sees your strength and wants to stand beside it. Noah's small hand found its way on top of theirs. Like a real family? He asked hopefully. The diner had grown quiet again, waiting for Grace's response. She looked around at the supportive faces, at her son's hopeful expression, at Mr. Andrews' sincere eyes. In this moment, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the safety of being valued for exactly who she was. Sarah appeared with their drinks, setting them down with deliberate care, her own eyes glistening. The coffee's aroma mixed with the familiar sense of the diner, a place that had transformed from a scene of shame to one of redemption. The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows of First Community Church, casting rainbow patterns across the worn wooden pews. Grace smoothed her navy dress, the same one she'd worn to the diner that fateful night, and watched as Noah fidgeted with his clip-on tie. To her right, Mr. Andrews sat tall in his Sunday best, his silver hair neatly combed, his weathered hands holding a hymnal. The organ music swelled, filling the sanctuary with amazing grace. Grace felt tears prick her eyes as the congregation rose to sing. She'd avoided church for years, afraid of the whispers and sideways glances that often followed single mothers. But today felt different. Noah's small voice rang out clear and enthusiastic, if a bit off-key. Mr. Andrews's deep baritone harmonized perfectly with the melody. Grace found herself joining in, her voice growing stronger with each verse. The words about being lost and found struck her heart in a new way. When they sat back down, Noah snuggled between them like it was the most natural thing in the world. He'd insisted on sitting in the middle of the family this morning. The thought made Grace's heart flutter. Mrs. Peterson, the Sunday school teacher, stopped by their pew before the service began. "Noah, I didn't know you'd be joining us today," she exclaimed with genuine warmth. Noah beamed up at her. "Yep, me and Mom and Grandpa Andrews are all here together." He grabbed Mr. Andrews's hand in Grace's, pulling them closer together across his shoulders. Grace felt her cheeks flush, waiting for the awkward correction, the stammered explanation. But Mr. Andrews just smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "That's right, son," he said, giving Noah's hand a gentle squeeze. Mrs. Peterson's face softened. "Well, isn't that wonderful? We're so blessed to have you all here." As she moved on, Grace noticed there were no whispers, no judgmental stares. Instead, several church members offered warm smiles and welcoming nods. Mr. Andrews had been a member here for decades, she knew, respected and loved by the congregation. But they were embracing her and Noah too, not as charity cases, but as family. Pastor Mike's sermon focused on redemption and second chances. Grace found herself hanging on every word, especially when he spoke about how God often worked through unexpected people and circumstances to bring healing and hope. "Sometimes," the pastor said, his kind eyes scanning the congregation, "our greatest disappointments become doorways to our greatest blessings. When we think all is lost, that's when God's grace shines brightest." Mr. Andrews reached across Noah to take Grace's hand. His palm was warm and steady against hers. She remembered their first real conversation at the diner, how he'd defended her dignity when others had tried to strip it away, how he'd chosen to fight for what was right, even when it cost him something, how he'd become not just a friend to her, but a father figure to Noah. During the closing hymn, Noah tugged on Mr. Andrews' sleeve. "Can we sit in the same spot next week?" he whispered loudly enough for several nearby people to hear. "I like being in the middle of our family." "Of course we can, Noah," Mr. Andrews answered, his voice thick with emotion. "This can be our special spot every Sunday." Grace squeezed Mr. Andrews' hand, overwhelmed by gratitude. This wasn't just about finding romance or even friendship. God had given her something far more precious, a partner who understood that love meant action, not just words. Someone who saw her strength instead of her struggles, who cherished Noah as his own. After the final amen, they made their way down the center aisle. Noah skipped ahead, high-fiving several other children he recognized from the neighborhood. Church members stopped to chat, treating them like they'd been attending for years instead of just this first Sunday. Mrs. Johnson, who ran the women's ministry, touched Grace's arm. "We meet on Tuesday mornings," she said warmly. "We'd love to have you join us." "I'd like that," Grace replied, surprised to find she truly meant it. They reached the heavy wooden doors, and bright sunlight spilled over them. Noah bounded down the steps, turning to wait for them at the bottom. Mr. Andrews offered Grace his arm, and she took it without hesitation. As they descended the steps together, Grace felt the weight of years of shame and loneliness lifting from her shoulders. She thought about that horrible blind date, about all the times she'd felt less than, about the struggles of raising Noah alone. But those memories no longer had the power to hurt her. Looking at Noah's joyful face, at Mr. Andrews's gentle smile, at the sunlight dancing through the trees. Grace whispered a prayer that rose straight from her heart. From shame to grace. Thank you, Lord. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Grace Miller, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it, the Bligsvis 12a.